And by awesome, I mean acceptable. Which, acceptable is a pretty high standard for Nightmare Grave. I'm sorry to say. Alright. Ugh. It has been a very difficult life. I was like, it's been a very difficult day. True. But it's been a difficult week. It's been a difficult month. It's the year of COVID, so it's been a difficult year, obviously. But, for me, it's actually in some ways been a little double-edged, not a big deal. On and on and on and on and on and on. Until I was like, no, it's pretty much my whole life. It's been a hard cosmos so far. It's been a hard time happened, It's been a hard since the Big Bang, what have you. Okay. It's been a hard time as an illusion. Give back. I have no clue. This chair. I love this chair when I'm playing video games or listening to heavy metal. I do not like sitting in it. That is not what it's for. The sitting in of this chair is purely incidental. Now, I need to share the fucking notifications in the various places in the screaming into the void section of the nonsense I call my life. Where's that at? There's a special. It's got its own fucking phenomenology in sociology right here. Schmerp. This does not go in here. Why is that where I shared this? Oh, my bad. Yes, that is where that goes. Actually, now that I think about it. It just happens to be called that. Never mind. You can't see the Discord. That's for the best. You don't want to. Trust me. I've spent a lot of time in this Discord. It's screaming chaos. It is not for the faint of heart. Done. Actually, that's not true. This Discord, hardly anybody ever does anything. The real problem is the silly Discord with the silly people who play the silly game. Okay, Control C, and then let's go Control V. And this is sort of pointless, but I'll do it here anyway. I try not to if somebody's done it recently. I don't want to come in here and be the last person to say something because I just immediately stomped out somebody else who was already in there. It's kind of fucked up. And then the, actual thing. I am allergic to the universe. So I'm on a lot of pills at any given time to make it manageable. Not the pills I should be on, but we'll see about pills I should be on in the not too distant future. I want to get my COVID shots before I have to start getting medical tests done. But I'll be honest, I'm still not well. Although I've done a lot of recovering. I'm even gaining weight again, which I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm telling myself that it's because now that I'm working out again, I'm gaining muscle mass, but I'm terrified that I'll somehow manage to never eat food again and still get fat. If there's anybody unfortunate enough for that to be their destiny, it would be me. It's a Stephen King novel. Thinner. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just the film. Because I think that might be one of those things where the book had a different name. A friend of mine read that book, and I would always just ask them questions about it. He was like, why don't you read it? And I was like, because you already have. They did not understand the nature of things like peer review. Wow, what is this? Twitch retweets? What? Why has that happened? Surely nobody... That's going to be seen by all kinds of people. Most of them probably don't know what phenomenology means. Twitch, why would you do this to them? Twitch! Oh no. 4,000 people are going to see this. That's outrageous. Okay. 4,000 people are going to be like, phenomenology, what the fuck is that? And then, like, not have anything to do with it, which is for the best. I am always niche. I have many niches. But I'm always niche. I am not mainstream. Except to some extent, in a certain manner of speaking, my music, but that's because I have to have a computer make it for me since I'm bad. Now, let's get back to the Luckmann Volume. We've already wasted an awful lot of time, and I don't have that much of it. We seem to have been at... Who the hell is Helmuth Plessner? Translated by Ale Hammond. Husserl's coming up real fast here, so it doesn't seem like it's terribly long. But I want to know if we have time to investigate who they are. Because I usually know. You know what I'm saying with this book. Actually, I might be at about 50-50. Nonetheless. Ooh, that's much longer than I thought. It's almost 20 pages. It's 6 pages. What are you talking about? $16 pages. Yeah, 16 pages. We don't have time. All right, whatever. I'm just going to have to get started. Okay, H. Plessner, mit anderen Augen, Zweichen, Philosophy und Gesellschaft Bern, 1953, pages 204 to presumably 217, because if it's pages 204 to page 17, then this is a very peculiar method of citation. Written in the unpublished Feischegrift for G. Misch, 1948. This is just after... What? What do you want? Just after the Second World War. No, I don't... I was reading, and now there's a domestic incident occurring. I've started playing guitar again, so the fucking thumb security system on the thing doesn't read my thumb anymore. Because it has thumb calluses now. I have to use the... What's it every time? This is an awful lot of work to have to go through to say no. Just, like, no. Very little that they do that's good anyway. Didn't they just say they weren't going to do that? Were they just complaining about it? I don't understand. Okay, speaking of not understanding, this was originally in German. We have long been familiar with the distinction between understanding, verstehen. Wait, I use this word all the time. Verstehen. That's not hard, right? Why do I not remember it? Verstehen. They use it in Berger and Luckmann. Berger and Luckmann use it all the time. I was like, this is Luckmann. In Social Construction of Reality. Verstehen. I think. Verstehen. Thurston. Verstehen. And explanation. Erlgren. Okay, so immediately what I'm going to say about that is that you have a thought about what something is. That thought has to be abstracted into language and then expressed, and then somebody else has to hear it and then has to interpret it internally back into thought again. So it goes thought, abstraction, communication, consumption, translation. That's how language works, which is not the process we think it is, because we tend to assume, ideologically of course, that we have a thought, and this is a really weird thing people do. A lot of people do not realize that they have thoughts that aren't language. I don't understand how you could fail to notice it, but they're like, oh yes, maybe there is something in my head that is not like something you could write down specifically in particular words. They're like skipping 2 steps here. There's a whole realm of phenomenology that you are not aware you exist in. Of what phenomenology? What is this? who cares? What is this? He says, poking himself in the temple with a fucking chopstick. I'm a very peculiar man who has a very peculiar show about very peculiar things. The conceptual element in each kind of experience has a distinctly and describably different character. Yet, this character can be made clear only by the concepts or the point of view between which it is sandwiched. Ooh, I love sandwiches. I'm very hungry. This is not an eating day. It is a very, very hungry labby day. Sandwiched are identified for each type of experience that is made clear how and why these elements form its context. If attention had been paid to this in debates for and against understanding, then methodological Manoism, oh no. Methodominism. Oh, that's not so bad. Methodominism would have had to be defended over a much broader front. Since, however, there was such partiality for the old scheme of perception involving sensory foundations, a conceptual middle, and an ideally constituted superstructure, the debate was centered almost exclusively around the question of whether it was necessary to distinguish coming to know something through understanding from coming to know it by having it explained, and most discussions were lost in a fog of definitions without an actual point in question being taken any further. That sounds like somebody has been listening to Wittgenstein to me. That sounds Wittgensteinian. So, does that need explanation? It probably does. But it seems a lot more like it's more the stuff that I was saying before, involving sensory. Yeah, so through understanding. So is it different to acknowledge that you have figured something out than it is to have something explained? And is it important to differentiate between the two? I would say yes, yes, and yes. If, however, with Misch, footnote, no, it's not a footnote, it's a citation. Well, fuck it then. With Misch, we contrast explanation as knowing about something with understanding as actually knowing something. Then the relationship of viewpoint and concept, if we ignore ideal constructs for a factor of the present, stands midway between them. That is exactly how I would write something like that, and I am infuriated by it. How dare you write like me? Everybody knows I'm trash. If, however, with Misch, Misch is the author, capitalized. Misch is the author of Die Idee der Lebensphilosophy. Lebensphilosophy. The fuck is Lebensphilosophy? In der Theorie der Geisteswissenschaften, Kennstert in 1926. So Misch is a person. If, however, with this Misch guy, we contrast explaining as knowledge about something with understanding as actually knowing something. Okay, okay, that's why they say that they want to not have ideal concepts. Okay, yes, I agree. This makes sense. Because what I was thinking was, there are lots of things that you can know about without knowing. And most people know a lot of things about something without knowing that something. My favorite example of this, and the most infuriating one, is the Bible. Everybody knows certain things about the Bible or says certain things about the Bible, but they haven't actually read the Bible or don't understand what it means. Trying to use the Bible to attack gay people while defending rich people is preposterous. It cannot be used. It cannot be used as intended to do that. That's not what it's for. So, in that way, there's lots of things that you can have explained to you and know details of without knowing them, right? And this is the thing about, I have a whole thing about Sherlock Holmes in one of the pieces I've written. Like, on what level can we conceive of Sherlock Holmes as being a thing that exists, right? And it goes into some of this kind of stuff. So he's saying we don't have time for that, which I've wasted a lot of time on, but these parentheses here these parentheses should probably be commas, because this really is important, because we have to be able to compartmentalize that out, which makes the rest of the statement true, because those are going to be most of the exceptions, right? I still have a problem with some of it, though, because of the whole, maybe the Bible wasn't that great an example. Maybe Sherlock Holmes is the better example of something that's purely socially constructed, or ideal construction, because there are things that people have had explained to them that it also seems to me like it's possible to have something explained to you that you can gain knowledge of. Knowing about something with understanding is actually knowing something. No, okay, yes, that is correct. That is what I'm saying. I do agree. Good. Excellent. We're all on the same page, which is page 26. Oh, it's mid-sentence. That's different. The materials of sensory appearance from which we build our personal and historical social experience of life must then be capable of being made transparent to understanding. If the mind is capable of penetrating to its essential core, the transparency of material things provides an assurance that there is another way of approaching the problem we are considering, but not that it is infallible. Our experience of life exposes us to the possibilities of error no less than our experience of nature. The struggle against misunderstanding and comprehension is a lifelong accompaniment to every man's existence and constitutes the problem to which the study of social and mental existence is devoted. Albeit this occurs at perpetually shifting levels. Independently of this, however, mental material in documents and monuments is what is done and left undone in speech and in work, shows itself to be transparent in nature. The material is not apparent as simply form and color, sound and force, movement and weight, but it has expressiveness. I thought that said expensiveness. I was going to lose my mind. Has expressiveness or reference or meaning. The natural scientist, because the questions he asks are in terms of what is measurable, starts by comprehending phenomena and their changing forms as signs of a hypothesized relationship, which must include indicators for experimental procedures, on the basis of which he can demonstrate whether his hypothesis is true or false. The whole art of finding out about things lies in the particular choice made out of the oblique kinds of approach. That was probably a lot easier to say in German, because in English there are a few things in there that are a little confusing. Particularly this bit about lies in a particular choice, because that could also mean that the whole art of finding out about things is lies, which is not what he means. Oh, English. Okay, in the human sciences, on the other hand, social sciences, we would call this social sciences. All science is human. Fucking whales don't go around developing chemistry. The student has to start with the possible procedures directly provided by the structure of his material. In deciphering texts or reading a statement, he is attempting to understand the motivations behind human handwork by means of evidence about the objectives which individuals set for themselves out of their own social needs and considerations. In doing so, he is guided by the same indications as is anybody who is engaged in human interaction. In this case, too, he cannot do without hypothesis. When dealing with interrelationships, questions of authorship, the establishment of chronological sequence, the recognition of influences, and the construction of causal connections. In special cases, when he is concerned with providing authenticity, he too has to call upon the help of chemistry, the X-ray analysis, perhaps even the astronomy, when it comes to establishing dates. But the material itself calls for interpretation of meaning, not for calculation, because, tell that to the statisticians in the quantitative field of sociology. I think they would beg to differ. I'm with you, don't get me wrong. Not for calculation, because for all its actuality as a visible, handleable thing, it is really concerned with the human mind. As is the case of personal interaction, mistakes can occur across distances in history because of insensitivities. There is the possibility of blank misapprehension, narrow-mindedness, or dismissiveness arising out of the enthusiasm or affection for 1,000 personal reasons. Ugh, is that not the truth? These are not dangers which threaten the natural scientist. Both are material with which he is concerned, and his methodology ensure that the observer's own being enters only minimally. By contrast, the human scientist's personality, with all its responsive capacities, has to be fully present. Even if he has to keep it under rational control, he must nevertheless let it come into play so that his material can make itself apparent to him and perceive it. Yeah, there can be a serious problem if you think you're going to be purely objective when you're dealing with human subjects, because you cannot be. And if you've put yourself in a position of extreme objectivity when dealing with human beings, then you're also putting yourself in a position of sociopathy, right? Because you don't have to take responsibility for the way that these other people might be feeling or acting or what they might be subject to. Those are all things that as a human dealing with humans, you are taking responsibility for, whether you like it or not. That is going to happen, right? You are doing these things and you are doing them to other people. This is one of the reasons why it's so important to take that into consideration in human subjects research. I always thought, that IRBs were a bit ridiculous and that all of that kind of thing was a bit much. But I'm reading some of the stuff that goes on in business and marketing fields with human subject research, and in human subject research, and some of it is like real awful stuff. So yeah, human beings cannot be purely objective when dealing with other human beings. The closest they can come is probably evil. For the human sciences, which are nourished by life experience and take their direction from it, the problem of relationship between standpoint and concept is different from what is suggested by the philosophical tradition. It must not be forgotten that the theory of dual composition of the perception of experience, which Kant developed from his inaugural dissertation on the separation of appearance from idea, actually represents a great advance beyond Leibniz, but, like Leibniz, he only takes mathematical and scientific knowledge into account. When the existence of a different kind and a different field of perception is admitted, Kant's dualism inevitably becomes questionable. In any case, it has to be restricted to the field of the exact sciences. Ooh, that's not a word I would use to describe physical science. Moreover, as knowledge of the nature of perception grew within the framework of 19th century physiology and psychology, that knowledge developed not only as a natural science using experimental laboratory methods, but also in harmony with and under the influence of Kantian theory itself. Thus, as dualistic theory of experience gained a broader basis. What? Thus, the dualistic theory of experience gained a broader basis. What did I say before that was so gibberish that it derailed my train of thought? The various difficulties with which, in the process, the human sciences were founded, the critical reaction of Delythy, Bergson, and Husserl, and ultimately of the whole modern philosophy and psychology which has felt their influence, all helped to bring to light the fictitious character of a doctrine of perception working with isolated sense impressions. In their different ways, they brought into question the feasibility of an approach which disregarded thought and even the mind itself. We are thus brought to consider afresh whether, at least for the human senses, any hard and fast distinction is tenable between two essentially different elements. Perception of thought, it may be, of course, that the traditional step-by-step progress from sensation via perception to idea will have to be completely dropped. So far as any theory of experience is concerned, and the antithesis between explanation as knowing about things, cognito circa rem, oh, that one was super easy, and understanding as knowing things, cognito rai. Cognito rai? That sounds like a supervillain. I am cognito rai. It's probably cognitio, but actually that's even better as a villain name. Cognitio rai. It might be Ray. May therefore come to be regarded in a new light. This question, obviously, touches on the relationship between individual part and whole, the selection of what is significant, the role of value judgments, the subjective conditioning of conceptual structures in the human sciences, and other aspects of basic assumptions of the human sciences. How the hell were people so offended with postmodern thought? This is just postmodernism. He is just saying that if you try to take for granted that the experience that we have is exclusive to sensory perception, rather than having things like ideology and preconceived notions and a preconstructed self, all of this stuff, like, it's just so obvious, right? And I just, if this is the way people were writing in the 40s, how did postmodernism get such a reaction? He's already saying it. In 1948, he's already saying it. Maybe it was easier because for them it was compartmentalized into the idea that, I mean, this is Heideggerian to an extent, right? Like the whole the experiential model is an illusion because we view things from the perspective of a subject. But the world is not subject and object. The world is one big thing that we are perceiving, right? And I think that this is touching on that to some extent, at least. Professional standards of the humanities and the human sciences have to deal with objects, texts, works of art, monuments of all kinds, and visual representations which they perceive with their sense organs and, on occasion, have to test using scientific methods. Since these objects represent the evidence of a human world and the sources of our knowing, a superficial interpretation would identify the point of departure of experience in the human sciences with that of the natural sciences, and our question about the role which approach plays in understanding would be answered by reference to the whole which approach plays in scientific explanation. In all this, what is overlooked is the fact that the function of the senses is different in the two cases. They do, of course, bring us into connection with things, or, if you like, with appearances. But what is the very substratum of observation in one case, that of the natural sciences, represents in another case, say that of cultural historians, a documentation of humanity, of human capabilities belonging to a particular historic period. It is only when an analysis of the kind of paper used for an old manuscript treats the document as a physical substratum that the approach of the natural sciences provides any help, although dating its composition is decisive in this case. It has nothing to do with the world of human thought, which is invested in the natural object in the form of images and linguistic signs. To clear perception of the natural object in this case, as in many others, does of course bring about contact with the medium by which the human mind has expressed itself, but it does not involve the view of a world of human mentality which is necessary for our reversal of the classical step-by-step process of perceptual elements as suggested is actually designed for understanding that world. Sense perception can therefore not be identified with the operative approach we are looking for in studying the substructure of experience, nor with the knowledge which this experience sustains. Where, then, is it to be found? What is it like, and what is its function? We will do better to look for some other situations in which our attention is not directed toward people and human relationships. Here, too, normal sense perception produces the indispensable mode of contact for orientation to milieu, for seeing faces, gestures, and movements, for hearing language, and for the expression of people's behavior and actions. In the familiar milieu of our own country, we find everything more or less obvious, so that the unquestioned character of everyday life allows us to appreciate the simplicity and ordinariness of encounters with people and their desires. Everything goes its own way, naturally, as if things could be no different, and we confidently go our own way, along familiar paths, with much regard. Observational alertness is at a very low level. We gradually lose our eye for the curiosities of beauties of city and landscape. Force the habit blunts sensitive appreciation. This is Heidegger's ready at hand, I think, more or less. It's at least very similar to that. If, for instance, we walk past the burnt ruins of the house that we have seen standing in its place for 30 years, it has to be pushed right under our nose before we are able to surrender our familiar picture to the new reality. Ooh, that is interesting, right? I still have that problem, especially when I'm in Meridian. My view of Meridian is like 10 years out of date now, 12 years out of date. And whenever I'm going through Meridian, Idaho, I'm like, where's that farmhouse? Oh, yeah. There's that place that, all of those apartments over here, that used to be a corral where there were horses. I used to stop on the way home from work and pet the horses. Sometimes I bring them leaves. Bitches love leaves. Let's see, where were we? Have to become exiles. Yes, we have to become exiles from the territory of the familiar things we trust before we are able to perceive it anew. Rediscovering new environment which companionably surrounds us and confronts us as an image. Our senses are able to enjoy them afresh, and we can see them again. This alienation is experienced intensively by anyone who has left his home country as a child and returns as a grown man, and perhaps most intensely by the immigrant in the prime of life who becomes aware of the thousand roots sunk in a friendly soil and of his inherited culture, strained to breaking point when he discovers anew the whole tradition from which he has sprung. Not as his home country would believe through the spectacles lent him by the friendly country which is sheltering him, but through other eyes. Ooh. This is italicized as well. What is true for sense perception holds true for the approach which is necessary for the consideration of spiritual and intellectual relationships. True awareness is wakened in us only by lexual relations. Oh, no, that was weird. True awareness is awakened in us only by what is unfamiliar. When something is not ready to hand, you think about it again. Heidegger's doorknob. You don't think about the doorknob. You just turn it and get into the room. You couldn't even tell if you're the one who turned the doorknob or if somebody else opened the door before you and you just walked in. But you can tell if there's something wrong with the doorknob. All of a sudden, you're consciously aware of what's happening because you have to struggle to get in, right? What is the true... Yes. However, to be able to look at something anew, we need distance. However wrong-headed and biased it may be, to cling to a scale which begins at the bottom with vague confusions and conceptual knowledge, and at the top offers clarity and specificity of thought, and however true it may be that since perception attains a figurative perception of its own as far as intuitive awareness is concerned, this of itself still does not permit us to reach a definition in the commentant and contradictory functions of perception which lie in understanding. There's like 8 commas in this fucking sentence. This is how I write. This is worse than how I write. That is not. However wrong-headed and biased it may be to cling to a scale which begins at the bottom with vague confusions of conceptual knowledge, and at the top offer clarity and specificity of thought, and, however true it may be, that the sense perception attains a figurative perception of its own as far as intuitive awareness is concerned, this, of itself, still does not permit us to reach a definition of the concomitant and contradictory functions of perception which lie in understanding. Good grief. Break that down into 3 sentences, please, because right now it is undigestible in its girth, sir. This is too much. For this, we need to introduce the 2 concepts of familiarity and strangeness. Okay, thank you. That'll be much easier. We are then able to say that the functions of intuition and perception and concept in the structuring of human experience are distinguished in terms of strangeness and familiarity. So much so that only what is strange, or estranged, comes to approach, or intuitive perception, and only what is familiar into understanding. Okay, so what we encounter is abstracted already when we encounter it, and it cannot be abstract in order to be understood. So we are alienated from certain types of knowledge, which are the things that we can know about, but not necessarily know. And the things that we necessarily know are things that are not something by which we are separated via estrangement. There are, of course, gradations and connections between these 2 zones of functions proper to them. Naturally, because it wasn't complicated enough. Our search for comprehension applied only to what seems incomprehensible. It is the unfamiliar with which we try to familiarize ourselves, and we can only estrange ourselves from what is commonplace in order to view it, to look it over. This is similar to habitus too, and the way that I combine Bordeaux with Garfinkel. Ethno-methodological breaching of habitus in order to cause people to examine their reality, right? Or moreover, so that I can examine their reality, because they're probably not going to. How are we dropping frames? I feel like I always drop frames in this show. There's nothing. We drop more frames doing this than Skyrim. Skyrim has frames. This is me reading a book in front of a camera. I'm pretty sure that it's trying to do this at 60. There's no reason for it to be doing shit at 60. Yeah, I can see a drop in frames. I'm like, I'm moving with vampiric celerity on the stream. That should not be happening. Cap me at 30. I told you to cap me at 30. And I think it's trying, look, I need somebody who knows how streaming works to do the streaming, and I can just read the fucking book. My life makes no sense. There are, of course, gradations and connections between these two zones and the functions proper to them. Our search for comprehension applies only to what seems incomprehensible. It is the unfamiliar with which we try to familiarize ourselves, and we can only estrange ourselves from what is commonplace in order to view it, to look it over. Yet, the fact that the familiar can be understood and the unfamiliar can be examined should not be taken as definitive characteristics, nor should we attempt to manipulate them logically without further examination. The comprehensibility of the familiar can be manifest only when the ground is prepared by conceptual understanding. In this way, the unfamiliar can become strikingly obvious to us only when we have accomplished the first preparative phase of distancing ourselves. Thus, the poet, the painter, and the scholar successfully interchanges these functions when his deliberately estranged vision catches what has long been familiar and the obvious, or when he grasps what is most alien and remote to his innermost thought. That is tangentially related to what I was saying about being imaginative versus being creative. Because there is a form of creativity in which you act in emulation. That is where this estrangement is minimized, right? So you're trying to create something which is a new mode of something which already exists. And in order to do that, you want it to be as close to the original as possible, despite having to change mediums from one to another. Let's see. Any simple optical replication is an example of this. The passport photograph, with the head turned slightly to the right, under bright lights, turns the familiar face into something simplified, black and white, unfamiliar, and unintentionally distorted. If it is a bad photograph, then mechanical distortion misses the point which caricature can make. If it is a good one, then the overfamiliarity of the image conceals the individual personality. But the photographer can capture this if he masters the art of portraiture, the art of the indirect approach of estrangement, which passes from the known to the unknown and back again to the familiar. Ooh, very nice. As Weberman rightly remarks, to draw is to leave things out. Thus, in any artistic representation which penetrates to the spirit of things through appearances, there must be some distortion about the work. Some partiality selectively emphasizes, in a word, some distancing mechanism. Okay, my problem with this is, maybe they're going to tie this in. I might be about to foreshadow that. But my problem with this is you're saying that what you're saying sounds like there is a method to estrangement, to making it strange. But that estrangement is generated by leaving out elements that somebody can't take in, right? And in this particular instance, that would be the case. What you're doing to estrange is to leave out elements of what is really there. And that doesn't seem to me to be... I guess that is the abstraction I was talking about earlier, right? In a more objectified form. So maybe it is fine, and hopefully this is going to hit something I can kind of see coming, that's deliberate. Otherwise, leaving something out would not be the thing that I would do, like Mansonos painting, for example, because we're talking about art here, right? The Mansonos style of painting was actually a reaction to painting in almost photorealistic ways, right? They were producing paintings that looked exactly like something in the real world. And in order to make the work elements of the work more important and to make the work draw the eye and the attention of people, the Mansonist movement deliberately broke a lot of those rules in order to make paintings strange. And they would do things that are like, this is the important part of the painting, so this is different. Like, there's a painting of the baby Jesus where the baby Jesus is disproportionately enormous. And the face of Mary holding the baby is disproportionately enormous, and it's like dark and weird and not centralized, and the places that draw the eye aren't the places you'd think they should be, and it's all really strange, but it doesn't leave anything specifically out, right? Like this is saying. I feel like there's a reason to differentiate those approaches, and maybe they'll tie both of those things together in the next paragraph or so. That would be nice, and if not, this seems like an odd choice for that. Because the omission of information, which might tie back earlier to abstraction, is not necessarily what I would say we would ideally deliberately operate in. It is a necessity of exchange of information, not something that we should take for granted is desirable, for example. In order to bring the object to light, the different materials and the different means of expression, a good writer and even the historical scholar will obey the same law. In composing the material, he must fashion it with a good dose of selectivity and partiality, but in such a way that his hand can be seen to work selectively if the material is to become alive, as a portrait does, and communicate to us in pictorial terms. The forcefulness of even Hegel or Marx or Spengler owes its heightened value to this. It brings things to light. It stimulates the inner eye. It gives us different eyes. Exaggerations and figures of speech, bold constructions, too, fulfill the same function of perceptual counterfoil to understanding. Okay, so that does tie back, and it is talking about abstraction, but in a way where I'm not sure we're going to be doing enough to say that you cannot take the abstraction for granted as true, but maybe you need postmodernism for that to come up. Not so much because people are mistaken about it, but because before, sometime after this, is where we get to the period where you have to bother to point out that the map is not the territory, because nobody that would have been expected to read this in 1948 would have made that mistake. It was not only learning to look at life with different eyes, but at one's own environment, one's own land, one's own tradition, and the wider aspect of them, in which lies the art of the human sciences, which, activated by genuine, i.e. painful, experience, destroys the familiar, so that it is as if the scales fall from our eyes. Ooh, a biblical allusion. It awakens us to new consciousness, liberates the vision, and makes it resistant to the refractions and the opicities of prejudice. We have all experienced this. What distancing powers do to the historical disciplines not owe to the disturbances which have occurred since 1914? Diligent work along well-trodden paths is appropriate to peaceable times, in which great passions are centered mainly on personal affairs, but the courage for seeing the world afresh is found only in times of desperation, when our very foundations are shaken. Only what is fed by one's own life experience can appeal to other people's life experience. Sensitivity comes only from the bitter draught of disillusionment. Pain is the eye of the spirit. Pain is the eye of the spirit. That's a fucking line. The other part, too, is depending on the word, that would also mean the mind. Because mind and spirit are the same word in German. So that could be a very peculiar sentence, and they might have been very careful about which of those two words they chose there. Apart from a new important... Yeah, apart from a new important expectations, it will be found that fresh enlightenment about human affairs, whether it be in biography or in demonstration or more significant interrelationships, has a better chance of occurring in times of turbulence or dangers, or through crisis involving gifted individuals, than in the happier times of peace. The force of insight is directly proportional to the misfortune of an epoch. Between the German-speaking historians and sociologists who were young before 1870 and those who grew up in the German Empire, there existed a clear distinction in terms of originality. But neither generation can compare with those who lived through 1848 or were contemporary with Napoleon. This extremely complex interdependency between personal productivity and life experience in the field of intellectual and scholarly work is only partial and occasional relevance to our present problem, which is concerned with the theory of knowledge. There is a danger when psychological and sociological influences such as these are incorporated of the objective status of knowledge, which is already subject to strict limitations, being lost altogether. See, that sentence is also extremely postmodern. Does it not put knowledge about human affairs at the arbitrary disposal of personal opinion? The answer to this question is a further question. Does the problem thus raised actually take enough account of the difficulties caused by the special nature of human affairs, difficulties with which the systemic historical scholar has to deal in order to make contact at all with his own life and that of others? Those who, quite rightly, pose this problem, however, may be yet again deceived by the illusory analog with nature. Natural materials can be before one's eyes and can be perceived by the senses before theorizing takes over. But the human world cannot be perceived, however concretely, and it's represented by documents and managements. What can be perceived, seen, heard, and felt is the material embodiments of symbols, which may indeed be quite apparent to the initiate, but whose undertaking cannot possibly be limited to the data they perceive. What is a person thinking when they write something? Why are they writing it? What is the context of the world in which they do so? This is one of the reasons why things like Hegel and Kant can sometimes be problematic to use, or the way that we use them might have issues. They're not speaking in a vacuum the way that we tend to use them. They are speaking generally in some of the most important things they've ever done in response to things we never read, or that might even be lost to history, right? So it can be really important to take that into consideration. These data are interpreted, but they can be used only as the bare bones of evidence for a rationally verified thesis, to the extent that they are used in conjunction with whatever corresponds with their own perceptual experiences. So, while the historian or the social scientist certainly recognizes the necessity for verification in discussion and respects the rules of objectivity in every respect, he has his public most not delude themselves into thinking their theses are described in the book of the world we have lost. In order to be sure of this, there would have to be some comprehensive vision of the world past and present humanity, which was comparable to the comprehensive view we have of nature, at least in so far as it is separable from thought, or, in this case, understanding. This is not the case. A view of humankind answering this description does not exist. Phenomenology practices and speaks of being in presence. Wessenschau? Wessenschau, being in presence, Wessenschau, and the appearances of the structures of being. We are not quarreling with this, but it has only an indirect connection with what we have in mind, of servicing understanding and at the time guiding it. At all events, it is not ideological. It is not identical with what we have in mind. Misch has made this clear in his critique of Heidegger. I want to read that. Where's that side of that? Oh, it's neat. I have to make a note here. Am I writing in this one? Is this one I'm writing in? No. That would be a travesty. I shouldn't write any of them, frankly. Well, I'm almost never going to... It doesn't seem likely I'm going to go out to a coffee shop anytime soon. Maybe I'll use this one. It is indeed handy. Okay, find... Misch. Let's see here. Find Misch versus Heidegger. No. All right, that could be really important. I'll just I'll just denote real quickly that it's page 34 because these fall out all the time and then I don't remember what they're supposed to be referencing. I remember what they're supposed to be referencing, but I can't find it again. The actual shock of recognition which enters into the attitude we are seeking to examine and condition of fear and pain necessary for an estranged view of things is one of the a priori conditions for understanding, even when its emotional coloring and personal depth are less in evidence. Conditioning and conditioned by experience at one and the same time, this attitude guides and supports historical thought in its search for understanding. Conditioned by evidence, because this veil cast over what is familiar cannot be lifted if there is no shock, which, in troubled times, passes over the quarter-turn experience. You exist within a state of habitus. You don't necessarily have to be cognizant of what's happening in your socially constructed reality, but you can be forced to face it suddenly and unexpectedly when something breaches your understanding, when something breaches your habitus, when something breaches the socio-normative. Now suddenly you have to face this reality that you had been taking for granted and weren't conscious of. The unconscious elements of the water in which you swim becomes something you are cognizant of. You suddenly realize you were eating from the trash can for the first time in regard to something. Because the making of what is estranged visible is the basis and forerunner of reflective understanding. Unquestionably, study of the world of the mind is accomplished under conditions utterly unlike any known in the whole field of the natural sciences. Only this kind of study has to discover the characteristics of what is examining in such a way that they do not appear directly before it as particulars emanating from the object itself, but in a way that reveals the retrospectively as preconditions of the way in which the object was originally envisaged. The student of nature can afford to omit any explicit representation of the a priori which he, no less than the student of human experience, assumes, since what is expressed is this a priori contributes nothing to the characteristics of what he wants to study. It can be left aside without involving any loss or damage to the object of study. This reminds me of the talk about the denaries. There was a lecturer who went on about denaries because that their dissertation was actually on how little we really know about them, because a lot of the Roman period of history was lost when those denaries were made, and so everything is sort of conjecture and guesswork and very little knowledge, right? And yet people make their careers out of arguing the finer points of these things that can't be proven or disproven given the circumstances, because what they're studying is not the denarii. Nobody gives a shit about that weird little piece of metal. What they're studying is the culture that made it. And it's a very difficult culture to study because there's very little evidence except for that fucking denarii and the things that immediately surround it, as an example. Okay, what he, i.e. the student of the humanities or social scientists, leaves aside cannot remain ignored without making the object of study defective. Those basic foundations by means of which it is possible to illuminate the intellectual world have their clearly defined place within the world they are designed to illuminate. It is apparent that this is the one situation in which the a priori, while expressing the conditions for defining the object itself, initiates the definition of the object. To study something which is not itself of the mind is to know nothing of this kind of limitation. If following Lit, we see in Dilthey's triad, Lit is an author, Dilthey is an author. In following this guy Lit, we see this other guy Dilthey's triad, experience, expression, understanding, the kernel of the self-same concepts we have been discussing, which are accountable for the kind of action in which the subject must be effective, if the value of experience is to serve a contribution of the thinking, i.e., in this value of the experience of living drawn from the human experience of the individual, which carries over into the general principles of philosophical understanding and scholarship, then intuitive understanding via concept to idea. This cannot be replaced simply by Dilthey's triad, which, considering what confronted Dilthey as an object of investigation, in this case the process of the spirit, in which the indicative assertion of the human sciences originate, still limits consideration of the problem of intuitive understanding. Once it is understood that this triad is applicable only to the human sciences, e.g. when interpreting documents and artifacts, but articulates those basic activities indispensable to man's intellectual existence in all its dimensions and aspect, and provides the whole foundation of the human intellectual being, including even its essential physical aspects, only then will we be obliged to agree with Lit that the concepts which were, to begin with, designed to set out exactly what makes the human sciences possible, illuminate beyond this the whole fabric of life, which, in the sciences, is reflecting upon itself, and, in the process, the fabric of reality, which those sciences take as their object. Clearly, for life experiences to form so that they can be drawn, and not only by the individual, but also by a science capable of bringing distances in time, it is necessary for experience to develop alienating forces which can throw familiar circumstances expressively and understandably into the unfamiliar light. This latter once more liberates that reflexive intelligence which reaches its full power in intuitive understanding. We're about to hit part 3, the final part, but first I need to pee. I'll be back momentarily. before? I feel like that was on before. I shut it off on the way out. That just won't be visible on camera. It's not a big deal. Okay, stop drinking this. This needs to be for when you wake up in the mornings. These will just fall on you later if you don't fix that now. Alright, I will continue on with by far my least popular show. But now I will have a Perrier as well. Yay me. I'm so parched that reading this book out loud is for some reason worse than dungeon mastering. Dare you. I may never see the inside of a bar again at this rate. Okay. Experience, expression, and understanding determine human interaction with men and physical objects equally well in familiar and in alienated situations. But what is implicit and taken for granted in a familiar situation becomes articulated in an alien situation and requires artistic and systemic form. Understanding becomes understanding discernment. Expression is realized in objective terms, and the shock of experience releases vision. We see with different eyes. Some people see with their eyes. Mine do not seem to be helping me out much in that respect, at the moment at least. We see with different eyes in contemplating with understanding what has become strange. There is at first the question of assuming the right point of view from which to examine human intellectual life. It is the point of view with which historians are continually concerned when they wish to portray a man, an epoch, or a whole civilization. The imagination plays a decisive role in design modeled by ideas insofar as design is comprehensive, bringing everything into a combined whole around one energizing center. Born of distance and shock, estrangement releases the possibility of imagination through the vision. The historian constructs all that he has understood about his idea into a composition, a portrayal of his vision. When we compare knowledge of this reflexive kind with the explanatory character of knowledge in the natural sciences, it becomes apparent that the form is deficient so far as any relationship with practical application is concerned. While for the latter, it is precisely this area in which it is effective. Understanding also means understanding about something, a point which Heidegger has made use of. It means mastering something, knowing what to do about something, and inherent in this ability is a certain kind of perceptiveness, alertness, and insight of the kind recognizable in the craftsman or the sportsman. With the loss of familiarity, we lose all easiness in understanding, and a contemplative, theoretical element takes its place. A kind of insight in which the special perceptiveness we have tried to indicate is preponderant. It is possible to identify, in efforts to understand, alien and dead civilizations, a positive tendency to exaggerate their qualitative differences and their unintelligibility, meaning that common sense understanding is impossible, so as to obtain understanding, which in this context means a comprehensive portrayal. This is one of the reasons why most of the things that people know about something are exaggerated stereotypes of that something, and people have a tendency to think in terms of exaggerated stereotype because it's easier to do that than it is to grasp any kind of meaningful, deep, nuanced reality of a situation. This is one of the reasons why there are many people in America who can't differentiate See what I mean? It fell right the fuck out. But now I wrote the page number so I know where it goes. Between leftists and, say, Nazis. Which is ludicrous, and yet just the other day I had somebody do that. In fact, I had somebody do that and then talk about how I was mischaracterizing Nazis by explaining what Jordan Peterson actually said. Presumably because they didn't watch the video in which that took place, because Jordan Peterson is the one who says it, not me. But I digress. Becomes apparent former blah 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 blah. In the natural sciences, things happen the other way around. Here we begin with uncomprehending observation, which is then accounted for in terms of conceptual description. The mode of thought, to begin with, stays broadly affiliated qualitatively to one particular approach, and is therefore impotent. So far as the way things are happening under observation is concerned, there is explanation without, as yet, anything being understood. As soon as there is a successful outline established of a relationship which permits measurement to come into play, explanation loses its descriptive character and throws off the qualitative concepts, which are, to a greater or lesser degree, connected with the observer's original approach. As it accumulates understanding of the way things under observation are happening, it is quite simply transposed out of the sphere of the familiar into the language of mathematical symbols. Cogito circa rem, knowing about something, is the ability. It's cognito circa rem, knowing about something. Cognito, as in terra incognita. But shouldn't that mean that it's incognito? I don't know. I don't speak Latin. Who gives a shit? Is the ability. Nobody's even fucking watching this. Nobody cares. In which the thing in question occurs, expressed in a language which ideally substitutes signs for all natural world meanings. Cogito re, knowing something, is perception of the heart of the matter, achieved through distance and alienating understanding, and expressed in a language, and mastering of which requires close, intimate, and living contact with natural world meanings, and which avoids any symbolic formalization. See, this right here, we should have seen what's it called? I say it all the time, and now all of these names have got it fucked up in my head, so I can't remember. Dunning-Kruger. We should have seen Dunning-Kruger coming, because this here says that it's an inevitability, right? That the Dunning-Kruger model eventually has to be scientifically shown to exist, sort of like Boyle's theorem made the mathematical inevitability of the string particle, right? Is because this shit has to happen too, right? If people have to be exposed to something in order to understand it, then they can assume that they understand it without being exposed to it, without ever actually knowing it. That's one of the reasons why I had to do that episode, Define Your Terms. These are the two directions in which natural science has developed since Galileo and Newton, and in which the arts and humanities have developed. Since the great social theorists, philologists, and historians of the 18th century and 19th centuries, the ancient ideal, which had such far-reaching effects, according to which knowledge of nature was to be genuine understanding in the sense of comprehending perception, knowledge of human life, which was grasped as to serve life, has lost its influence over us. We are masters of a world of nature we no longer understand. We understand a human world of which we are no longer masters. Postmodernist. That's postmodernist. We were not out of left field, man. This vein was always there. This divorce of understanding and mastery constitutes the greatest possible danger to the contemporary world. However deeply entrenched modern scientific thought may be, and however much the development of the technological marvels of today owes to it. For in his inability to reconcile mastery with understanding, and to reveal to man his place in and duty towards a world in which nature and mind meet, an inability which we feel rather than know to exist, man attempts to master mankind in whatever respects he can manage, which means in terms of nature rather than mind. There is a paradoxical parallel between the subtle penetration of the alienated spirit and the intellectual life of the individual, and the methodological transformation of man, which eliminates all his humanity and turns him into a thing, an object, and which casts its shadow in terms of racist ideology. Oh, hey now, slow down, it's only 1948. You'd think it was 1965 the way this guy's writing. Some brave new world, with even greater possibilities for power, will be easily managed without much irresponsible falsification. If philosophy does not succeed in achieving a balance between knowledge of the human world and knowledge of nature, between mastery and understanding, no political progress or religious awakening can ward off the dangers threatening mankind for any length of time. This is perfect. This section here. Okay, give me another card. This is not correct. I need for fuck's sake. I have a whole box of the things that I need to get rid of, but I don't know where that box is, so I keep using up the ones I need to be able to use. Somewhere there's a whole box of cards that could only be useful as fucking bookmarks, and I have no clue where it's at. So I'm using my current business cards instead. What fucking... These ones actually cost me money. The other ones were free. I'm so mad. All right, this is page 38. Well, surely I'll be able to find it. Just note that it's page 38, and let's move on. A frequently expressed objection to this guy de Lethe's philosophy of life has been that the total understanding it requires has, so it is said, led to the revitalization of the values of the individual and has helped to bring about a crisis of belief, of certainty. In reply, I can offer the following consideration, particularly with respect to the danger I have mentioned. If understanding does reach through its own actual historical condition and becomes conscious of it, and does not rest until it has become estranged from itself and grasped itself through the distinct I, it could lead to the growth of a new security of freedom for man. But he must not stop halfway. An uncommitted conception of life or existence, which might be regarded as a superstructure independent of time or place, and which affects every single thing that men have brought about or can ever bring about, bars the way to an alienating vision of one's own world, if it remains, as happened with existentialism, in some twilight zone between ethics and anthropological analysis. The strength of insight is proven to an experience which is limited. Its fruitful simplicity remains both territory and boundary for understanding. It must start from life experience and must return to it. In understanding, I have to commit myself. If the object in question is to be reasoned through, the greater the commitment, i.e., richer and more profound, the individual capacity for the resonance, the weightier it becomes. So, the more difficult the object becomes, the more important it is. I've just had an outrageous epiphany. There's a bunch of shit in here that is the opposite of the way products are marketed now, but what I'm going to call post-market marketing, which is the idea of using marketing philosophies in order to engage in the practice of modifying already existing services and products to make them more in line with the way that the overwhelming majority would tend to use it. A bunch of the software that I use has recently had updates that get rid of many of the options that I used, because the options that I used were not usually used by people, and it became somehow, the way that they think, reasonable to get rid of options that the average user didn't tend to use, even though they're actually executing more efforts to get rid of existing options. Why do this? And it has to do with the fact that they're doing this in reverse. They are preventing people from being able to have the new experience. But they think they're doing it in order to control the maximizable experience for the outcomes to be the best for the greatest number. They're pulling a John Stuart Mills, but instead of it being ethics, they're doing it in terms of what they think will generate the use or maximum appreciation for their product. But what they're actually doing is stopping somebody from appreciating what their product could be used for. And the reason that this is most important, weirdly enough, is probably video games. So I'm thinking to myself, why is Sims 4 the way that it is? And one of the biggest answers to that question is not just corporate thinking, which is most of it, but it is also this thing that I've just described being applied to the way that this game should be played, which is why you have guitars but no drums, because the people playing those, or the people that game is, the people who make that game, no, it's not even the people who made it. That's different. The people running that more or less still a live service model of a game, right, are thinking that the majority of the people that the game are made for are not in a band. So they have not made it possible to be somebody in a band in the game. But if my version of the game, if my spiritual successor to earlier versions of The Sims were made into a game, as I have often imagined, then we would definitely have that. And people who didn't even think to themselves when they got up this morning, it'd be interesting to see what it was like to be in a band, might find their character joining a band and having this whole new experience they could never have imagined, which is not only more rewarding, but also allows them to examine the product. What they are doing is effectively making the product invisible. This is also a well-known phenomenon, even in their own field. If you make it so that your product is used as well as possible, your product becomes effectively invisible. And the people who are using the product don't think about it. Don't tell other people to use it. Don't consider it at all. Because to them, your product is the water in which they swim. And how are you gonna counter that? By fucking it up and making it hard to use? That'd be a terrible business strategy. So how do you deal with that problem? And what I'm saying is, having options that somebody doesn't necessarily know how to use because somebody else might be using them, it could even be a way that somebody can experience or explore something they didn't expect to. This has a lot to do with the way that marketing is also got a hugely deliberately ignorant blind spot these days, but never mind. Yeah. Something that at one time became perfectly visible because the vision was subject to shock and, subsequently, to an idea suddenly striking a creative imagination in traditional terms, fades into the passing of time. It becomes obvious and banal. The vision fades. Different eyes are always necessary to make what must be visible for a long time, but which cannot be sustained, become apparent once more in different ways. We can always return to sense perception, regardless of how any particular perceptual scheme treats it. Experiment in the natural sciences is carried out on the self-same assumption that sense impressions can be identified under certain prescriptive conditions. For the observation of the working of the human mind, however, there is no repetition. It cannot be kept still or unchanged. Once it passes down into tradition, it is framed with the very words used to evoke the object, with the same medium of familiarity as is finally buried in it. Somebody else must come, and this further shocks the catastrophes happen, so as to make the scales fall from their eyes. The same biblical illusion. Is this going to be recorded? Well, all Twitch streams become VODs, and then Lampe Creative VODs are eventually uploaded to YouTube. This should be up by next Thursday. There's one from the previous Thursday up already, and the Thursday before that you can check out on the YouTube channel if you'd like. Yes, you'll be able to view the VOD. I don't actually remember how to... It's always annoying to try to figure out how to view the VODs, too, because that's another thing that is modified for no good reason. The fucking Twitch interface. Don't get me started. It's fine. I'm not very good at streaming. So I don't have to know. I can just accept that I'm bad. This seems to be an objection, but it is in fact a confirmation of our thesis. Natural scientists and mathematicians are also subject to common human limitations in any particular situation. Again, that's postmodern as hell. It's 1948 when he's writing this. It's not like we didn't pop up out of the ground. We are very much still grounded, man. Our shit is based. The solution, I think, the solution of a problem is bound up with certain conditions which have to be fulfilled if the general reconstitution of the subject necessary to produce a solution is to be successful, quite independently of what elements are involved in the structure of the particular field's numbers, physical or chemical symbols, sensory data, words, or some other signifier. Again, just make this 3 sentences. Why you got 8 fucking commas in this one sentence, man? It makes this very difficult. This had to be translated. That's horrible. I feel for the translator. It is here, just as any situation... Oh, pardon me, bookmark. As in any situation, there are difficulties to be resolved. That imagination enters something which neither theorists, nor practitioner scholars, nor technicians, artists, or statesmen can do without. Imagination means an ability to liberate oneself from a given situation and to associate oneself with it. An ability which each one must have at his disposal, if only to a moderate degree. But the imaginative factor must be limited. In mathematicians and natural sciences, and in their dependent disciplines, to a creative auxiliary function in the discovery of new relationships, because they have at their disposal in identifiable quantities and operative rules based on definition, stipulation, or experimental conditions, which are independent of explanation. The human sciences are in quite a different situation. Their factual, observable basis lies in texts and in documents, which only an understanding sympathetic involvement can make fully accessible. The helping hand of imagination not only contributes to the construction of hypothesis, but to the construction of the original elements to which the theses are applied. If the human scientist is working with material which is incomprehensible, it makes it as opposed to the elf scientist or the gnome scientist. If the social scientist is working with material which is incomprehensible without some personal experience of what is expressed in that material, it follows that the theory of the human sciences does not develop by following the circular schema, point of view, concept, some overall conception, concept point of view. The relationship between the sense perception and imagination, which is valid for the experience of nature, does not obtain in this case. Perceptual observation becomes auxiliary, and the imagination acquires, in addition to its function, in the theoretical structuring of understanding, the simultaneous task of representing afresh a reality which is irrevocably dead, along with the people who lived then. It is for the imagination to produce the objects wherein understanding is to be fulfilled. Bringing what is irrevocably past into the present can only be accomplished in a language which it is impossible to formalize, since it has to appeal to the power of the imagination. Thus, the following two assertions can be made. It is for the imagination to produce whatever objects are inherent in texts and artifacts, so that they are present and understanding may be achieved. Secondly, producing such objects is something which cannot be done apart from the living communality of language, or be preserved from decay. It has to be done over and over again, and always, as if we are looking at it for the first time. I like that. It finishes pretty strong there, too. Okay. That, we got through that. No problem. It's also really interesting, too. It's funny. I was not expecting phenomenology and sociology to become this, like, I don't want to say time capsule. It's weirder than that. Oh, the next one's fucking Husserl. Sweet. I wasn't expecting it to become this, like, genealogy of postmodernism. But it has become that. Even the way that he used that language at the end there, Plessner here, is very similar to the way that Baudrillard does. It's fascinating. I'm going to have to reread this whole book in like 2 or 3 years just to see where it crosses into being the roots of Derrida and Baudrillard. Because there's a bunch of stuff in here that is very similar to that. In fact, that one right there also said a lot of stuff that was very Derridian as well. Like, what is it that this piece means? That actually, I guess that's sort of the opposite in some respects. Fascinating, anyway. Let me just check to make sure nobody was foolish enough to at me in the Discord about this shit. Okay. And then I will... let's see. I guess I'm going to end the stream, frankly. So... if I die before my next stream, hold on. I have to type it out and spell check it. Otherwise, I'm doomed. Okay. Yes. If I do not see you before my next stream, chat. What? If I die before my next stream, I'll see you now. Not smooth at all.
Tests. And then I'll make this section. Rolling tests.
Rolling tests.
These are listed in the rules. Lamp Creative is rating. Thank you for the raid, Lamp. To roll a test, gather the add together the total points you have for a stat. for the skill and governing stat of that skill appropriate to the test. Then increase or reduce that number by any modifiers. The modifiers, i.e., a weapon's mod stat, firing at long range. All of these are gun things. Acting while impaired, etc. Benefiting from a specific talent, etc.
Ooh, good call.
Then increase or reduce that number by any modifiers. Roll that many d6s.